Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thanks everyone for joining us today for the webinar. My name is Isaac Kimmel. I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer with Pathlock. I've been in the SAP Security and Compliance, or GRC space, since 2005. So at Pathlock, we have an international presence in terms of our own employees being across the globe in terms of various offices, of course, not only in North America, but elsewhere. And then as well, a global customer base, so over 1,300 different customers across the globe. Here we just have a brief look at the Pathlock product portfolio. And today for the session, we are really going to focus in particular on cybersecurity for SAP. So the cybersecurity or CAC space, as we've labeled it on the slides. And really we're going to focus in primarily on the topics of threat detection and vulnerability assessments. First, to get things started here, what are some of the common challenges and realities in the cybersecurity arena? We can see them here, right? But there's been a huge, in fact, 300% increase in cybercrime since the start of the COVID pandemic. 47% of security alerts, in fact, go uninvestigated due to this overload. And it takes a lot of time for organizations, if they identify it at all, to identify things like a data breach, for example, 277 days. And why is that? Well, it's not only the increase in the cybercrime or that type of activity, but there are far more, open cybersecurity related positions in the US than there are the qualified individuals to fill them. So that's very difficult to find and hire and retain the appropriate skill set and have enough of those folks to actually adequately assist with the type of cyber threat without going in and getting some additional software solutions to help address this. So focusing in on really SAP and what we consider the various layers of protection. Let's start at the center of the diagram here, labeled RBAC, or RBAC, Role-Based Access Control. So this is the standard for SAP systems, and it's a very good starting point, but increasingly it's no longer sufficient on its own. So the role-based access control is really your classical SAP security and authorization model. In short, right, it means that we create some roles, whether they're the Z AP clerk role, whether it's our warehouse manager role, the finance or controller role, whatever roles we are creating in our SAP system. And then we're assigning those out to our user community. Most SAP users will have quite a number of different roles assigned to them. So that's the classical SAP security model. It's very effective for what it was intended to do, but it's more of a static model of we design, test, and then deploy these roles to the user community. Now, moving up in the diagram, so of course that is always going to be the center point from an SAP application perspective, the RBAC or role-based access control, but what else can we do and offer on top of that to have a more 360-degree view of the protection? The next piece mentioned, ABAC, or attribute-based access control, does not require you to start over from the role-based perspective, but adds an additional more dynamic and flexible layer on top of that. So with attribute-based access control, we could be doing things like dynamic data masking or data access control that are typically not feasible to do with the role-based model. So perhaps we just need to mask some sensitive, fields that are HR or PII related or ITAR related in the system, or doing dynamic evaluations where we say that this user, John Doe, can normally see this information. They have the proper traditional authorizations, but if John Doe is logging in from an unknown IP address, then we need to mask or block access. That could look like some sort of a threat, or we want to take additional precautions. Moving up in the diagram to the vulnerability detection. So this is about looking at vulnerabilities, performing assessments or scans in the monitored system. So this is looking for insecure configurations, could be scanning for malicious code or code that lacks proper security modeling so that it could be exploited. So one quick example there could be we scan and we look at the code in the SAP system and we find that it doesn't have a proper security or authority check. So something could easily be exploited because it wasn't really developed correctly to be secure. So that could be just one check we do, so to speak, as part of the vulnerability assessment. And then finally, the real-time component of this from the cyber perspective, threat detection. So the ability to detect and respond to the threats and provide alerting in real time. Again, this is really the minute-to-minute, so to speak, real-time response and alerting, while the vulnerability assessment layer is your kind of regularly scheduled daily, weekly, monthly checks in the environment. So both, of course, are quite important from a cybersecurity perspective. So one way to think of vulnerability management is that in the case of a building, as we have depicted here, we need to secure all the relevant access points, all the access to the premises, not only the main entrance, but maybe the parking garage, the windows, doors, any roof hatches or emergency exits, and so on. Because if we do not actually secure all the access points, of course, not only is the building not secure, but we may also have a false sense of security. And with SAP, certainly there are often many different access points, so to speak. So the role-based access control is only one of those. So with vulnerability management, what we can do is we can automate the periodic, maybe weekly, assessments or scans to report specific issues and the associated number of findings. Again, for example, a program lacks proper security or authorization checks, could easily be exploited, or a program is auto-starting some report that we don't want to happen in the system. Again, maybe opening things up for potential exploit or just causing other errors in the system. So with vulnerability management, again, we have the regularly scheduled assessments or scans of the monitored systems. Now, in the animation that we'll go through here for threat detection, we'll see some employees, it's lunchtime, they're going to head off out of their offices to lunch in the company cafe or cafeteria. So let's take a look. Okay, lunch break, these employees are heading out of their office. They've gone for their lunch there. Now, some of the employees did lock their office doors, as we can see indicated here. However, some of them are not locked. So what's going to happen? We'll see the orange dot that just moved around through representing the intruder. And of course, that threat or that actor is going to try the various doors or entry or access points. Of course, could not get into the two locked doors, but very quickly and easily found the third office door that was unlocked. So at that point, we certainly have a threat, an event that we should get alerted on, and we need to be alerted on very, very quickly. So that is what would happen next. We have a threat detection solution installed and monitoring your system. Because in reality, we did not perfectly secure all the access points. We need the alerting and detection to be quickly aware of the situation. So as part of the threat detection solution, we provide that real-time alerting. This is something that needs to be really happening, continuous monitoring. That's the whole idea and goal of the threat detection, because finding out about this, a day later or a week later or a month later doesn't really do you any good in terms of a quick remediation or kicking the bad actor out of the system or taking appropriate corrective action. So with our cybersecurity dashboards by Pathlock, what we're able to do is start with more of a big picture or executive dashboard view of the monitored systems. So seeing what systems are monitored, what are the overall status and trends from both a vulnerability management and threat detection perspective. And from there, we're able to then see risk ranked results, critical, high, medium, low, and as desired, drill down into further details and also those specific findings. So we'll take a live look at the cyber dashboard in just a minute here. But first, let's have a look at just one example of a simple user behavior that we likely would want to be alerted on through threat detection. So we have a few screenshots here from the SAP system. And in this example, the user has gone to one of the standard SAP table display transactions and has put in the table name MARA, which has all the general material data and information in the system. And we can see there as well, how many entries do we have in our system for this table? Looks like over 2,600 entries. There could be tens of thousands depending on your environment. A lot of times users do have access, IT users, but also could be some of the Power Business users to these table display transactions, even though they can be sensitive, but a lot of the users may be savvy enough to go try to view this type of data in this manner, not just through the normal transaction screen. So what has happened in this case, the user has the normal SAP role-based authority to go ahead and view the data or display all the table contents, up to those 2,600 or so entries. So again, per the standard SAP role-based access control, they do have these permissions or authorizations. So they're viewing all the data in the system, but now what happens is that the user goes ahead and in the inset right screenshot, their user is going to go ahead and attempt to download the data, so all the table contents. In this particular case, the user did have, again, the classic SAP authority or authorization to do this. So the user has successfully downloaded all the data to their local PC, all the material data entries in this case. Now, this could well be a data exfiltration threat, especially the users, saving it to their local laptop, not to a network drive. They could copy this onto a USB drive, do whatever they really want to with all that data at this point in time. They could do the similar thing, right, for the vendor table, HR related tables, whatever the case may be, assuming that they have the appropriate SAP authorizations or permissions to do so. So without threat detection, we're not going to be aware generally of such an event or behavior in a timely manner, and there's really no chance of a timely follow-up and or corrective action. Now, of course, in the real world scenarios, we could also set appropriate thresholds, for the download size. So maybe we're not as worried about a 1 megabyte download, depending on the quantity of data in our system, but a larger size, 10 megabytes, whatever threshold we'd like to set, definitely could be a concern, because then someone is, saving off locally a massive amount of data through one of the SAP tables, which again could have customer, vendor, other sensitive information there. So by being able to detect this right away through the automated solution for threat detection, we can immediately send an email alert to the appropriate team or parties and then surface this information right away through our cybersecurity solution and the associated dashboards there. And of course, in addition to this, we can certainly forward these threats or events to your corporate wide SIEM tool that you have in your organization. Let's go ahead and switch gears now to go ahead and take a live look just for a couple of minutes at this cybersecurity dashboard and kind of what information can we get out of it from a few different perspectives. So currently what I'm looking at is kind of the home page, so to speak, for our cybersecurity executive dashboard. So for management or higher level management in the organization, the intention is that you could certainly start here to see more of that big picture view of all the monitored systems or assets. Whether we want to see, the business impact of any critical vulnerabilities. Perhaps we want to understand what systems or assets are being monitored. For example, our production systems versus the non-production, maybe development quality systems that are still important. and if any have notable exploits or kind of unnecessary exposure. We may also choose, depending how we'd like to classify our assessments and checks, we may want to tag them to a compliance policy. So that is optional, but we could have tags for our SOX compliance, GDPR compliance, and then make sure to be aware of, are the relevant systems based on those checks maintaining that compliance? Are they not having any critical findings based on our classifications there and the content? Moving to the upper right corner here, we are seeing the trend analysis by default here on a monthly basis for the critical items. And this is looking at the number of really threats and vulnerabilities detected. Again, here it is summed up by month. We could change those data points. First, if I just look at the known critical vulnerabilities that the solution's been detecting, this is relatively stagnant in our demo systems. This would, in the real world, not be a good sign in the sense of we're not really seemingly resolving the detected critical vulnerabilities. While the number's not really going up that much, we're also not closing any of these out or mitigating these findings, it seems like, in any way. If I switch to the trend analysis from the threat detection point of view, this is a more dynamic line chart because it is based off the number of threats or events through the threat detection solution. So that is fluctuating quite a bit. It seems like we may have suffered some sort of a cyber attack in June based on the very high volume of threats then. I can have a glance below this for a look at those unresolved vulnerabilities and the aging or the time to resolution. So again, this would indicate we're not getting these known vulnerabilities resolved in a timely manner because it's showing me here based on the risk ranking. Unfortunately, we have a lot of known vulnerabilities, detected vulnerabilities that are taking over 3 months, between 3 and 6 months to actually get resolved there. And then if I have a look in the lower left corner, we'll get some more specifics and metrics around, again, those vulnerability assessments and scans, along with the threat detection solution, the number of threats or events that are detected. So the key here is to have that risk ranking and visibility right away, critical, high, medium, low findings, both from a vulnerability assessment perspective, and then also, of course, in terms of the various threats or events that were detected. Most likely, our team would be investigating, of course, the more critical items first from a priority perspective there. So this is just one example of high-level, cybersecurity dashboard intended for really just management, tracking, and overall high-level monitoring purposes. Now, from here, for those in the organization who would like to get into more detail, can certainly do that. So we can start getting into the different results sets and assessments and specific findings all through the same interface here if we would like. So let's get into just a little bit of that here today. So let's drill down a little further. If I'm someone in the organization who needs to get more detail on this. So if I want to look at my various vulnerability assessments or scans, I can do that and see that we have our core compliance assessment with over 3,000 checks being run, and then the number of findings and unique issues that were detected. But let's focus more on the threat detection point of view. So for our threat detection, the next level down, it's still a dashboard, but it's looking at it from, again, really the threat detection event monitoring perspective here. So for example, the events by asset type and criticality, again, in these demo environments, our production systems, we have a high volume of threats or events that were detected, and the chart is broken down into those risk rankings, critical, high, medium, and low there. Two other items I'll point out on this particular dashboard, the events by user. Of course, this could be quite important to see the users that are linked to the highest number of events or threats in the system. So we have a couple of accounts here that look more like system accounts or kind of generic accounts in the system. So are those kind of system accounts, have they been compromised or what's going on there? There's a very, very high volume of threats. Or we could see if they're tied to a more personal or end user account in the application. So for example, Jay Strauss, one of our cybersecurity colleagues and experts, there's a lot of events, threats tied to his account in this case, which we would expect due to his involvement in working on this particular system here. So of course, any user with a very high volume or outstanding volume of threats or events is something we need to drill down into for further detail. And then events by data source, to mention briefly, this is just visualizing which data sources that we're using for the threat detection. So we look at over 60 different data sources are tied to the most events. So the SAP Security Audit Log is always a very good source. So it's not too surprising in our system that a lot of our events are using that as their primary data source in the application. Now, maybe I want to just see some trending information, again, specific to the threat detection. So I've just clicked over to that view here. So in this case, we're seeing some daily data points in terms of the number of threat or events that were actually detected. And we're seeing some fluctuation here, which makes sense. The most frequent events would allow me to see, are we seeing the same event or threat, again and again in the environment? So for example, we have some odd activities going on with one of our critical SAP batch or system users. Looks like that's one of our second most common events, so to speak. And then the events by terminal or PC are also very interesting, because this is essentially saying that a lot of the events or threats, maybe it's happening with different user accounts, but they're coming in from the same PC or terminal. So for example, these actions are all tied to one particular user's, corporate laptop or PC. So there's different ways we can view all of the events, tied to a terminal, but again, very, very important for investigation and resolution's sake. We want to see those groupings, whether the events are by a user, by a different PC or terminal, maybe some malicious actors, logging in with different accounts from the same compromised terminal or PC there. So far we've seen a couple dashboards, again, starting with more the higher level management view, and then getting into a few more dashboards that are focusing in on the threat detection aspect in particular. Now, finally, and just cover it briefly for today, for those on the IT or security team who need more information, they can drill down, of course, even farther from here to really get into the specifics, which certainly they'll need to investigate as part of their responsibilities and job function in the organization. So loading right now, the more detailed and granular results there. So getting into the specifics of all these, events or threats that were detected in the environment here. So we'll see a variety of events. For example, I'll click on one and we can start drilling down for further information, but you'll see there is a severity rating 1 to 10 is one of the key criteria here. Just loading an example there. So this is some unusual HTTP or URL-based activity in our environment. So someone port scanning the system here. So we're able to drill down into these specific events and threat results through the same interface. And then of course we could, continue doing further investigation, can maximize this just to make this a little more visible here. So we can see, okay, this particular threat related to some URL or port scanning, severity level 8 out of 10. We can see our trending for a same type of event or threat by date. Is this all coming from the same user, the same PC or terminal as well? And then we'll start getting into not just the visualization, but the solution gathering the relevant information for us. Again, those same events from the same terminal or PC by the same kind of data source that we're checking, in this case, the HTTP logging, and by the same user. So automatically kind of collating and presenting relevant information that is linked together to help benefit the team for a quick investigation and assessment here. So what we've seen today are just a couple of the different, dashboards for the cybersecurity offering, specifically around the threat detection and vulnerability management and assessment. So starting with this higher level management view for monitoring and trending, but still being able to go down into farther specificity on both threat detection and for the folks in the organization responsible for really looking at specific results, you can get all the way down to that level to review the details of each and every threat or event that was detected. So we've had a live look at the cybersecurity dashboard. Let's return to the slides here. So how do we see it in terms of implementing threat detection for SAP systems? Phase one is really about classification. What kind of information, events, or threats should we look at? How can they be classified from a kind of categorization and, of course, criticality or severity point of view? So our solutions support phase one by having very robust out-of-the-box content with configurable classifications. So the content is there for you to start using right away, while you certainly can add your own definitions of threats or even checks for the vulnerability assessment piece. We want to have appropriately classified out-of-the-box content ready to go with the solution. In phase two, in addition to the, for example, threat detection alerting capabilities, what we want to do is not only really describe the problems or threats in the system, but solutions and or best practices. So really more, how can you resolve this, or what is a recommended approach, whether that is just a description of a suggested resolution or a link to some industry standard best practices for how this should be handled. And then of course, phase three, staying informed. This is really about having that real-time alerting in the solution. So sending out email alerts, making the information really immediately visible through our Pathlock solutions and the dashboarding that we saw. And of course, in addition, we can also, again, if you would like, if it makes sense, to forward those events or threats to your company-wide SIEM tool. That can be done as well to help improve visibility and response time. So to quickly recap the different layers of protection here, where we're going with these various capabilities is to really have more of a 360-degree and holistic approach above and beyond the basic role-based access control that is at the center. So by being able to do things like attribute-based dynamic access control, whether that's data masking or blocking access to certain sensitive data based on whatever regulation, GDPR, ITAR, etc. And then on top of that, from the classic cybersecurity perspective of being able to do the vulnerability assessments and scans as a really more preventative methodology to close the loopholes, help secure the building better, so to speak. And then of course your real-time monitoring and detection, that's taken care of by the threat detection piece. So just a few takeaways from today's webinar. We showed how we can help streamline our security operations, especially cybersecurity operations, by usage of dashboards, which allows us to provide various levels of detail. We really want to try to provide the appropriate level of detail for the various stakeholders, having really a single point of truth for the relevant statuses, and making sure we have automation in place so that if there are any issues or specifically threats, the appropriate parties are notified in a very timely manner so that a response can happen. This is the type of information where finding out about it a month later is not good. That's really not going to cut it. So we need to have very timely awareness when we talk about threat detection especially. So the overall goal being keep the security up to date, have automated threat detection and analysis happening, and be made aware very quickly if there are any real issues, especially critical issues or threats found in the systems there. Now, at this point in time, I'd like to hand things over to Stephanie. We can open it up for Q&A.
Okay, great. Thank you, Isaac. It looks like we have a few questions that have come in, and if you do have any more questions, please add them to the questions box and we'd be happy to answer those. Okay, our first question is, kindly explain if the solution is agent-based, and if so, what are the requirements and prerequisites, and what are the supported environments?
Sure, that's a good question. So these SAP cybersecurity solutions from Pathlock really, in short, are a native SAP solution, or you can think of it as an add-on or plugin to the system. So there's no external servers or hardware requirements. It also means we scale quite well, no matter the size of your SAP environment, whether you have one SAP production system or 100 SAP production systems. So we're not needing to do any mass data extraction to another database or server before we can generate alerts or events or anything like that. So it's very plug and play in that sense.
Okay, great. Our next question is, we see a strong push by SAP to RISE. Question, how can Pathlock apply its controls within the SAP RISE platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So this solution, because of its architecture and again, where it sits within the SAP environment, from our perspective, if you have your SAP system or systems hosted by a cloud provider in the private cloud, or if you still had an older system on premise, in short, that is completely fine to us. We can still support both the scenarios with the same solution. So the topics will still be, relevant no matter who your hosting provider is, but there's no issues with using this solution set, whether it's hosted in a private cloud or on-premise.
Okay, and then our next question is, can Pathlock be used by system integrators for, say, Pathlock as a service offering? Is the solution multi-tenant capable?
So this particular solution set is really designed to live within the customer's environment for kind of performance and those scalability reasons. So happy to have a farther conversation with you on what you're thinking there. In general, this particular offering of the cybersecurity piece is really intended to be licensed and used by a customer within their own environment, because again, we're not actually pulling data, sensitive data out of their system to an external cloud provided by us or anything like that.
Okay, perfect. I think that's all the questions we have for today. Again, if you do have any more questions, you can email us at info@pathlock.com and we would be happy to answer any of those. And we hope to see you at future webinar events.